In today's mind readings, we have two economic things that people seem to really be struggling with. And I don't know why, other than the fact that people just don't understand economics. So, people generally want, I think we can generally agree, that we want the lowest prices possible when we buy goods, right? You buy a pack of gum, you would prefer that the pack of gum costs as little as money as possible, right? If you can get it for $1, okay. If you can get it for 75 cents, better. So that's anchor number one. Anchor number two, we generally agree that people should earn a living wage, whatever a living wage is defined in your area. Remember, a living wage is a wage in which you are making enough money to afford housing and life's basic necessities. Generally speaking, financial planners will say that, for example, between 25 and 40% of your net income after taxes should be allocated towards housing. So if you make $1,000 a month, your rent or your mortgage shouldn't be more than between $250 and $400 a month. Now, in some places in the United States, for example, that's very achievable. In other places, that is completely unrealistic. You can't even get a cardboard box in Boston or San Francisco for $400 a month. You can get maybe like a square foot in somebody's apartment. And so in those places, a living wage would have to be much, much higher. So you end up with this push and pull then. If you pay a living wage to your employees so that they can live reasonably well, and you want to offer low prices, you have got to have employees in places where it's not expensive for them to live. Right? This is the whole point of globalization, the point of outsourcing and offshoring, where you find places where people can live on much less money, and therefore you can make goods and sell them for lower prices. If you have to use labor, for example, that is based in the city of New York or Boston or San Francisco, it's just going to be expensive to have people there. Simple example, when you look at like the entry-level job for an account coordinator at a public relations firm, it used to be 20 years ago, you could pay that person $20,000, $25,000 a year, and that would be okay-ish to get by on. That's not the case anymore. Now you're talking, $40,000, $45,000, $50,000 just because the cost of living in those places is so extraordinarily high. So if you are reliant on that talent in that location, you're going to have to charge higher prices. So how do people reconcile this? Well, there's a couple different ways that you can achieve lower prices and still pay living wages. One, of course, is to find people to do the work that cost less based on where their cost of living is. If you're kind of a company or business where you can have virtual workers, then you can get virtual workers pretty much anywhere on the planet, including places where cost of living is extraordinarily low. And workers are still able to get the job done. If you care about or are required to have workers within a specific location because maybe there's a manufacturing plant, you build that manufacturing plant, again, wherever cost of living is lowest, if you want to be able to offer those low prices. And the reason I bring all this up is because I see an enormous amount of uninformed opinion about people, on one hand, saying we should pay a living wage, and on the other hand, complaining about how expensive everything's getting. Well, everything's getting expensive because it costs more to pay people a living wage, particularly in the larger urban areas. But in general, right now, that plus supply chain issues and things makes everything more expensive. That's just the nature of things. There is one exception to this rule. The exception to this rule is that if your employees are not human. Right. So if you are automating, if you are using robots instead, then your cost of living, such as it is, cost of operation is much, much lower because robots don't need health insurance. They don't take vacations. It's less of a challenge if they get injured at work because you can repair them. and in general are not subject to all of the issues that come with human beings, like healthcare, for example. The more you automate, the more you can pay the remaining human workers that you have a living wage, right? Because if you used to need 100 employees on the factory floor, and you're paying them $15 an hour, but now you've automated and you only need 5 employees to maintain the robots, you can pay those 5 employees much, much better, right? That's just, again, this is basic economics. The trade-off there is you then have higher unemployment because there's less of a need for that labor because machines are doing it. So is there a solution that allows you to maintain full employment, pay people a high living wage, and have extremely low costs? No. That's just basic economics. You cannot violate those basic supply and demand things. Could companies earn less money? Of course they could. Could they have tighter margins? Yes, of course they could. The challenge then becomes how resilient are those companies? We found out during the pandemic that companies with extremely thin margins, meaning they were barely profitable, didn't survive. Right? They ran into adverse conditions. They did not have enough money in the bank to endure, and they didn't have the agility needed to pivot. And as a result, they went out of business. So there is a certain amount of profitability that lends itself to resiliency. The more profitability you have, the more resilient you are. Now, other folks will correctly point out that there are some companies where people are, the disparity of the pay inequality within the company is dramatically, almost hilariously bad, where the CEO makes, 10,000 times what the junior most employee makes. Until 2 years ago, yeah, that was kind of the way things were. Since the pandemic and the Great Resignation, that's not as much the case anymore because now companies are essentially starved for employees. And the way to attract employees is to raise wages. Someone who is unhappy in their job at $10 an hour is still probably unhappy in their job at $15 an hour, but the rest of their life is happier because they can pay their bills, right? They can afford a nicer accommodations or more food or whatever the thing is that makes them happy. Just handing somebody a bundle of money doesn't necessarily change that a place is a terrible place to work at, but because the market is so tight right now for labor that employees can demand more and get it, and as a result prices will go up. So that's economics. You will hear people of every political stripe yelling about what they think should happen. Some positions have some merit because they're somewhat based in fact. Other positions, not so much. But the reality is, if you want or you have to pay people a living wage, your prices are going to go up unless those people are located in different places. So your choice is, if you need to maintain margins, are either to use employees that are based in cheaper places, wherever that place may be, or use more automation. But either way, you can't have your cake and eat it too. That's today's Mind Readings. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.